Right, let's move on to our second in the design phase and our third section of the afternoon, design review. That's part of the overall design phase, but there have been two issues that the BCA has identified as potentially problematic with design review. One is that commissioning-related design reviews are being inconsistently performed and frequently miss the basic purpose and intent of a design review. And then the second one is clarification should be provided, just what we're talking about, on the role of the commissioning authority in the design review process versus the role of the designer of record. And I think Mark just teed that up interestingly, and we'll turn it over to Saverio to talk about it a little bit more.
Thank you. Yeah. Mark actually made a great point. I think he read my notes beforehand. One of the nice things about being a commissioning provider is you get to provide insight on behalf of the owner, but you don't have the professional liability as far as putting a stamp on it. So you're giving suggestions and thoughts, but it's not you who's redesigning the system. And as Mark said, one of the things that is really important with the design review is to understand your role as a commissioning provider, in that it's not up to you to say why you're using this type of manufacturer over this type, or why are you going with steam instead of hot water. It's really to say, okay, I understand what the OPR is, I understand what the owner wants. Now I'm going to review the basis of design and the design documentation in such a way to ensure that it's being met. I'm not adding my flavor, I may make suggestions, but it's really not up to the commission provider to recommend major changes. Some of the other things that I like to say, it's important as a commission provider, whether you're a rookie or seasoned person looking at drawings, is to know once you get those drawings, they're going to be used by various different personnel. You're going to have construction managers looking at them, mechanical contractors, you're going to have vendors looking at them. So you almost need to keep in mind the big picture of what is the equipment supposed to do after it's been installed. Again, tying back to the OPR. One of the things I think is very beneficial and can help make a commission provider successful is understanding the type of test you're going to do on that piece of equipment. Understanding how you have to test it allows you to look at the design in such a way to think about, all right, well, where am I going to put my gauges? Where am I going to put my instrumentation? How am I going to access this? And then keep that in mind for the operators. Again, being closely involved with some of the union schools in the city, I always get to hear the horror stories from the operators of, well, they put it in, yeah, it works, but I have to cut a filter in half to get it around the pipe that they use to block the entranceway to the unit. So one of the key things to keep a design review successful is to understand the OPR, understand what the facility is supposed to be used for, who the maintenance staff is going, who the maintenance work is going to be turned on to, the staff's capabilities, right? Are you putting in some very robust, fancy control system, and it's in a school, and all they had was a janitor before that turned the building on by flipping a switch, and now has this, direct digital control system, and they want to know, how do I turn that thing off at night before I go home, right? So it's important to understand the players involved and what the owner wants. And then when you start looking at the designs, know where you stand. Sam made a great point of, looking at the designs at different phases. Are you looking at a schematic design set, a design set that maybe is only 25 or 50% of the way done? Or are you looking at construction documents, right? Maybe I don't need to focus in on a lot of detail if it's in schematic phase. We just need to know that there's going to be a air handler, 2 chillers, a boiler. But if it's construction set and it's going out to bid soon, well, I better not see any blanks anywhere. I should see all the ductwork connected to something at least. One of the other key aspects with the design review is understanding how the issues or findings are going to be addressed. And I think a lot of that stems out of the charrette, stems out of good communication, stems out of the commissioning plan, but I'm going to go through the drawings. I'm going to put together my list of questions, comments, findings, what have you. I can't just turn that into the owner. Sometimes the protocol dictates that I hand that over to the design engineer, and then the design engineer, he or she will sit down with me and we'll have a conversation about my questions, and we'll talk it through, and maybe the issues come off my list or they're addressed, or maybe there's something that you now turn up to the facility team or the operators or the to the owner and say, all right, well, we've got to this point, the commissioning agent made this, has this finding, we want to address it, but we need your direction, right? You need to understand, while you're looking at the drawings, what's going to happen when you find something wrong? What's the protocol and the communication process? I like to also coordinate in such a way that anything that I identify, I share with all members of the team, because I might see something as an issue, but the chief engineer may say, no, that's not a problem, we'll get around it. Or the chief engineer may have been, unfortunately, burned in the past by a specific instance and says, you know what, I insist on this, and it's something I would have never thought of. I had a project recently where the chief engineer wanted a steel beam above his chiller, and I would have never looked for that. But the chief said, you know what, I know at some point in time, the next 20 years while I'm here, that compressor is going to fail. There's right now nothing above it to actually chain fall and get that piece of equipment off. And there's not enough room around it to bring in a mini hoist. Put a steel beam above and I can have something to attach to. Easy, quick fix, but you know what? You just involve the chief engineer in the design review process. They love it because now they're already thinking what happens 15, 20 years from now when it fails. And it's an easy fix, better than having to put that in afterwards or do it after the equipment's been installed. Some of the tips and tricks I would share with a rookie, something that I learned, and I'm kind of partial to the area. My start was actually commissioning on aircraft carriers, so being around here brings me back many memories. But when I was coming up, one of the things someone once told me was, if you like to color, commissioning's perfect for you. Because you take a set of drawings and you pick a color and you say, all right, this is my supply air temperature. And you color all the ductwork in it. And then you take another color and you say, oh, this is my return. You take another color and you do chill water piping, etc. Not only do you go through the system in a detail that you're looking at every connection, but you see the interactions between the systems. You see abandoned ductwork, or ductwork that goes somewhere and then stops. You find diffusers that are connected to something that they shouldn't be. You find mistakes that you wouldn't see if you're just looking at a set of drawings in black and white. So even if I get them in CAD and they're in color, I still like to color them myself because it's a nice familiarization process for me. Plus I get to relive my kindergarten days of coloring in lines. The other nice thing about going through a set of drawings that way is you could start looking at the connected loads of systems. So if I go through a set of drawings and I start highlighting and I notice that I run out of yellow highlighter, but there's only one air handler and there's 17 distribution ductworks, well, I've already found a major issue, right? Do I know that there's a 500-ton chiller, but when I start adding up all the air handler coils, I find that they need 700 tons worth of cooling, right? Going through something in that level of detail, which is a great experience, I think, for a rookie or anyone new, because that's the best way to come up to speed. And now you have a set of drawings that you can go into the field with, depending if they're construction set. You can go into the field now and you can walk to a certain area and know when you look up that those uninsulated ductwork that's not connected or that piping is chill water, condenser water, whatever it may be. And it's a nice tool to have. And lastly, when I go through drawings like that and I see something that is a major issue or a major item that I would say, this is where, I call them sore spots, this is where you're going to get hurt when we actually go into construction, because if I'm looking at the drawings and I can't figure it out, then some tin knocker's not going to be able to figure this out. Well, once I know that, it helps me when I get into the construction phase, because guess where the first place I'm going to go to is? That sore spot that was on my drawing that we had, two email chains about, that's the first place I'm going to look, because that's most likely where the first issue I'm going to find is going to be. So that's my process with the design review, and I open up to my colleagues. Maybe they use different colors than I do.
A lot of times I see projects getting into that coloring process, which is very a useful exercise, but they don't get into that process until the building's been lived in for a year and things are not working and you're trying to figure stuff out. That's the wrong time to be going through that process for the first time. You want to catch it beforehand. And maybe it's a design issue, maybe it's an installation issue, who knows, but if you've gone through that process during the CD phase, you hammer it all out right then, and it's just 10 times easier knock out, and there's a lot less angry phone calls at that point too. Is there a question?
Yeah, obviously, none of you were around when they built the convention center in Philadelphia, firstly. And secondly, wouldn't you get into the engineering aspect of how to do the building in terms of its energy requirements at the beginning, say orientation of the building, say the load that the building may need, and how you're going to do that in a sustainable fashion? I hear you talking about chillers and today, again, it sounds like something that we were doing in the 50s instead of now it's 2013, where we should be orientating buildings so that they're solar cell. We should be looking at oxidized fuel cell engines. I mean, we have all these tools now, and I have heard you talk for a few minutes, and none of those things have been brought even into your design phase, into your, and that should be at the forefront, because that would help you in the budgeting and being able to budget where the owner, and especially in this territory that we're in, PJM, would get benefit from these solutions.
So the question, there's a comment about, was to what extent, I guess, just to make a synopsis of it, does the commissioning authority engage with, I guess, promoting and looking at opportunities for energy efficiency? I jotted down something earlier about that too. To what extent is the CXA actually becoming an energy consultant in the projects? Or is there one and they work with, and how does that work? So,
I mean, I think if it's in the goals, in the OPR, as far as a requirement for energy efficiency, or an achievement of a certain Energy Star rating, then that's part of the commissioning provider's purview. Going back to some of the earlier comments, as far as when you're looking at a design, I was going from a very basic standpoint of just looking at what's already there, but there are opportunities definitely. I see a lot with controls of equipment as well. When you're looking at the control of something, it's very easy for them to say, well, this is the air handler, this is how it operates. And then as a commissioning provider, while it's not our stamp, it's beneficial for us, for the owner, to go out and say, well, are you incorporating economizer? Are you doing static pressure reset? Hey, have you thought about heat recovery? And if it's early enough, you may influence the design. It's still up to the design engineer to actually incorporate it. So it's good to suggest. It's definitely nice to get to the table. Hopefully you've built a good enough rapport with all the work you've done prior with some of the lead charrettes and some of the design review, commissioning plan and kickoff meeting, that the design engineer says, you know what, you're right, I will add this in, and it gets incorporated in, before it becomes something that you now have to sit down with you, the owner, and the design engineer and say, this is what we find, what would you prefer as the owner? So if it's already in the design, of course, you have to look at that. But there are opportunities as a commission provider when doing a design review early enough along to make a recommendation. I had a project with a hospital that was going with steam because they had an area that had glass wash and cage wash, and they needed high pressure steam for that area. So they decided, well, we'll just put a boiler in that does the whole building. In New York City, you have Con Edison, so there's no need for you to run your own boiler when you have central district steam. So the requirement was really just the building's design was being driven by one specific minor requirement versus looking at the whole building in total. So they actually wound up going with a hot water system for the whole plant, and then they just put a small package boiler in just for that specific isolated area, and it saved them steam traps, condensate return. It saved them having to take Con Edison steam, and when they were done collecting it, quench it and dump it to the sewer. And it was just a conversation that came out of the design review. It did change the design specifically, but it was the design engineer who took it upon himself to say, yes, we're going to go with your recommendation. If he would have said, you know what, we're putting our own boilers in, then it's up to the owner to make the decision, and then it becomes a little bit, confrontational at times.
Yeah, just on your point about how the building is sited and all of these sustainable cutting-edge technologies, I think one of the advantages about being in the commissioning industry, the buildings that we're working on are are typically the LEED buildings with, LEED Platinum, Gold. I mean, really high-end buildings that are using the latest and greatest in sustainability. And so we're working on some of the coolest projects that are out there. And two, as a commissioning authority, you get to see a lot more projects perhaps than other project team members because of our role. And we get to see projects from pre-design, design, through post-construction and occupancy. We're there trying to verify that it works when it's occupied and seeing energy performance, 1 year after and so forth. So we've got such a unique perspective in such a number of buildings that I think it's really beneficial for us to be able to participate with the design team. And we've seen this strategy work here. We've seen that we're able to provide insights from other projects that we know kind of have worked, and we have some of the lessons learned in the scar tissue and things that didn't work as well on some of these cutting edge technologies. So I think as a commissioning authority, particularly not as a rookie perhaps, but once you'll get quickly, you'll get some experience and some things under your belt and can really provide some valuable input to the design team so that they can help make better informed decisions through the design process. So that's, I guess, one point. The other point, I just wanted to talk a little bit further about the design review process and what we do after we do our internal review, and I think my colleagues do this as well, is many owners have an operations and maintenance staff that's going to be left maintaining this building. So these folks are, generally, there's probably more work to do than the resources and, kind of fighting emergencies and everything else. And it's very difficult for them to spend time and focus time and review a design of a building or of an addition to the building or whatever. So we normally, as a commissioning authority, would facilitate a review with them and incorporate their comments with our comments so we can have a consolidated comments. Because we're viewing ourselves as kind of the advocate, obviously for the owner's project requirements, but also an advocate for the O&M staff. And really, our view is kind of a long-term view. I mean, we want the facility to function and perform as intended. We want it to be maintainable and operate well. So getting the guys and girls that are on the day-to-day maintaining it on a day-to-day basis, having their input and involvement in the design process. We really view that as our role to help facilitate that. And it can give you some pretty unique insights of, from their perspective, when they walk into that building, what they're going to be looking for and what has been, perhaps issues or things that have been a problem for them. So I think that was kind of another aspect of the design review, that process that we think is pretty important. Sometimes it's challenging to find who's going to be operating and maintaining that building, depending on what, it's a commercial environment or a commercial building that may not have staff in place or whatever. But oftentimes you'll know who's going to be operating and maintaining the building in the future.
I had one comment on this particular section. I'm an architect, and when you're starting off as a rookie in an architecture firm, you do a little bit of sort of technical stuff and a lot of assisting with planning and things like that, building up to construction documents. Because you don't know anything, and so you've got to learn it in order to be able to put a set together and work with a spec writer and everything else. But it sounds to me like and correct me if I'm wrong, if I'm hiring a rookie into a commissioning authority office, it would seem to me that one of the best places to put them early is on a set of construction docs. And because they wouldn't have the judgment to look at a design development scale or schematic design review and begin to see things, they wouldn't know what they were looking for. But when they're they can start doing the colored pencils and stuff like that, and at least begin to see ducks to nowhere and things like that, come in, they can bring them to you and you can say that. It would seem it's a kind of a reverse way of doing things. Does that make sense? So if you're out there, rookies, start looking at construction docs if you want to know your way around a set before you get hired. Okay, I think we're going to, Kevin, quick.
In the design review, would the panel's answers have changed, or if so, how? if it wasn't new construction and it was a retrofit? That's my question.
Okay, quickly, just to repeat the question, would the basic structure of what you're talking about and the issues that arise in a design review, is it different from new to existing, to retro commissioning or existing building commissioning?
So, well, I think, just to clarify, I think you said retrofit. So we're taking an existing building and renovating it?
Yes.
So,
Oh, I see, sorry.
okay. So, yeah, so that's a little bit different than kind of an existing building commissioning, for example,
Right, correct.
which is where you're really dealing with existing systems. So potentially you're going to have the whole design process. You're going to be, there's a design team, construction team. You'll have construction documents. So it's very similar. I mean, the process is the same between new construction and renovations. There's the additional aspects of you've got some physical constraints with your existing structure and what you're trying to save and salvage and so forth. So the process is really the same, and I think there's just some nuances within the constraints within the building, and those can be pretty significant if you're tying into and connecting to existing infrastructure. You've got the building's sited where it's sited and facing where it's facing. So there's some real constraints that you have that you need to kind of work around and design around. But overall the process is would be the same.
Right. I would say, to add to what Mark said, is I think the process does follow the same path. The one thing I've been seeing more of as a trend in the past couple of years is, specifically for retrofits or changes to specific areas, if you're tying into existing systems already, let's test those systems before you even start the design. In other words, let's not take the design that we had from 1980 and assume that there's 20,000 CFM of air going through this ductwork, because it might have been tapped off by 5 other projects that no one ever documented, particularly with chill water lines or hot water lines or ductwork. One project that I had recently had ductwork where an engineer said, all right, we're going to retrofit this area. Well, there's this big branch of ductwork here. We're just going to tap off of, we only need 300 CFM for this room. And this hospital was actually adjoined to a university, and that ductwork that went through that room that on the drawing looked like it was part of the hospital actually was fed from an air handler in the university that was shut down at night. So you would have had a room thinking it was getting air from an air handler that they had control over. Meanwhile, they were stealing air from another building that they had absolutely no control over. So the design review process is the same thing. You still do all the steps, but there might be some pre-test work that has to be done before the design engineer really goes to town with developing it, because is it really 5,000 CFM or is there only 3,000? So you don't want to turn over something, starting already behind before the design starts.
Yeah, any time you're going to reuse existing infrastructure or tie into existing infrastructure it's tricky, and we are seeing the commissioning authority being looked at to really help deal with some of those issues, and we're working on the hospital 12-inch chilled water main that we were going to connect into as part of a major renovation, and we did our investigations before we started design, and it was an empty future riser that didn't connect to anything. So, but the designer was ready to design and tie into that thing. So it really becomes tricky. It's easy to do a gut renovation. Well, easy, but when you're reusing things or tying in, it's fussy, and I think the skill set that commissioning authorities have, I think we're pretty savvy in the field and know what the heck we're looking at and can dig into things and sort things out. And I think that's a skill set that's very helpful early on in some of these activities that typically isn't a strength necessarily of a designer.